A lot of people get into running ultras because they were looking for something hard, or they read a book and it pushed them into doing this hard thing. Yet, when we actually get in the middle of this thing, we're like almost surprised that it's hard. I just want to talk about that seeming catch-22 in the ultra world, where we're almost chasing after the difficulty, and yet when it is time to actually do the thing and then we get part of the way into the ultra, we are either surprised or struggling or almost baffled by the fact that it is as difficult as it is. I also give a little bit of background of how my car almost exploded on the way to Javalina Jundred and how I got stuck in the middle of the desert with no service for hours. So if you're interested in my life and why I haven't put out a podcast in a while, we're going to get into that. And I'm just going to give you a fair warning. This one's a little rambly. It's on the shorter side. I think there's some good information in it, but it is very much off the cuff. I did not do a ton of planning and just let my mouth run arguably longer than it should have. And there's no video version because for some reason it got deleted off of Facebook. If you skip this one, I hear you. You should come back in a couple of days and listen to Lexi Miller talk about parenting and how to train for running when you're a parent and new parent and how to balance all that stuff in your life and some specific postpartum considerations for women. So let's get into this one about doing hard things and how my car blew up. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Franz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. It has been a while, and I am sorry. I've been trying to post some updates and interviews, but it has been a very hectic time in my life the past couple weeks. So I've not been able to do one of these between work and traveling to Javalina and a bunch of stuff. It's been a mess. So I'm very happy to be back here and recording one of these. So Javalina 100, super fun race. You should go if you have the opportunity or the option. It's everything from, so it's like a 20-mile loop, I guess would be starter there. And if you want to just do a short race, you can do the 20-mile version. If you want to do 100K, you can do 3 of those. If you want to do the 100-miler, you can do 5 of them. It is hot. It's the desert in Arizona. It was like high 80s, I think, is where it peaked at. Felt 90-ish. That's fun time. Super big party, good race. And I learned, a lot. And you should check it out. So Javalina, highly recommended. On the way to Javalina, my car blew up. So from Salt Lake to Javalina, I chose to drive because I was going to take my dog, was the plan. And Teddy was going to come along. I brought him to races in the past. He loves it. He loves hanging out. He loves the people. He loves doing the whole travel thing. He's going to be a very good trail dog once he is old enough to actually run. Unfortunately, I didn't read the one-line sentence that says dogs are not allowed at Javalina. My mistake, not anybody else's. I messed up. So very close to the race, like a month prior, finally saw that one-line sentence. Apparently when you're too focused on distances and all the other stuff, you miss that stuff. Finally saw that and ended up switching plans, let's just say. I couldn't fly anymore because it was too late, so I was still driving. And I drove from Salt Lake down to Phoenix. And the plan was to just go through Page, Arizona, which is a little shorter, a little faster. If it's snowing, it's the wrong choice, but otherwise it's the right choice. So I get to Page, I get to 33 miles past Page. I know it's very specific. You'll hear why in a minute. And through this entire stretch of drive, it is very intermittent phone service. About as soon as you get 5 miles outside of Page, Arizona, it is again dead zone, and dead zone for a while. So you get about 20 miles outside of into that dead zone, and my car makes kind of a weird noise. So I pull over to check it, and don't really know too much about cars, so can't really see what I'm looking at, but everything seems okay. I turn it back on, and then before I even get back up to speed of the highway, I'm trying to get back up to 65, I hit about 60 and boom, my car makes this big exploding noise, and I see smoke shooting out my tailpipe, which is always what you want to see at like 60 miles an hour in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone service. So I brought it to a stop as quickly as possible, and unfortunately I could no longer find one of those little pull-off areas. I was on a very car-width shoulder next to a cactus and pulled over, as I said, had no cell phone service. So thankfully, I can call 911 because satellite, and had to wait for the highway patrol to show up. He was helpful, actually very helpful, and let me use his functionally satellite phone to call my warranty company. They are supposed to function like AAA. They do not. They function kind of like AAA, but they don't work with as many partners. So we were on the phone. I was on the phone with them for like 30 to 35 minutes, and the summary was, we cannot get you a tow truck to Page, Arizona. You are going to have to be towed farther, and it's going to cost you an insane amount of money. So instead, the highway patrol guy just hooked me up with their tow truck service, and while the guy's name BJ, while BJ was on the way, Officer Talbot helped me hook me up with a machine shop or a mechanic shop and a rental car, and took the tow truck back into Avis, back into Page. He dropped me off at B&L, where my car still lives to this day. Hopefully I'll get sorted eventually. Took me over to Avis, and they got a rental car, and then booked it down to Phoenix. It should have been about a 10.5-hour drive. It was a little over 15. It was a long day. The choice there was basically get a very expensive hotel room in Page or get a very expensive rental car for about the same amount of money and do what I went down there to do. So the damage was already done. My car was still 6 hours outside of Salt Lake, broken. So I might as well go enjoy the weekend. It's kind of the only choice that made sense to me. So went to Phoenix, had a very good time, saw some friends, met some new friends, met some people I've only known over the internet, and paced Natalie for 20 miles on the end of her 100K. It's a good time. Again, highly recommend Javalina Jundred. I hope your car doesn't explode on the way there because it makes it worse. So I am in conversation with warranty people. Oh, one lesson from that, always have AAA, because nothing else works like AAA. The tow truck that picked me up works with AAA. It would have been free. So have that again. Joy. And then 2, hopefully the warranty will cover it. They're supposed to, if I didn't violate some comma on page 20 of 35. So we will see how that goes. Hopefully we'll know by the end of the week. But regardless, I am driving my old broken Toyota 4Runner that definitely is not in good shape, but at least still gets down the road and gets me to work. So good days. So that is where we are on my life. Been a mess, and then trying to just catch up from work and get everybody moving and running and lifting correctly, So that is why I haven't done much on this platform in a week or two, and why I've been posting some old interviews with people I recorded a bit ago. And if you like the interview thing, you should definitely tune in on the weekend. I'm going to post one with Lexi Miller. We're going to talk about ultra running and parenting and how that jives together. So today I want to talk about a catch-22 that shows up a lot in the endurance world. And I want to be very specific. This is not anybody with whom I specifically work or no specific person. I see it a lot, and it usually comes up kind of in the realm of somebody encounters me on the Instagram or the Clock app, and I get a message saying hey, I don't really run, or my longest run is X, and I want to run an ultra, and they kind of get in it and guide them through it, and it just causes problems. Or people who really enjoy running, but they enjoy running 20 miles a week, and then they sign up for an ultra, and then they don't train, and then they get out and do it, and then they learn that it's hard, right? And this is kind of where we end up with this catch-22, where a lot of people sign up for this stuff because they think it's a good idea, or they know someone who did it, or they read a book by David Goggins, and they decided, this thing seems like a thing that's difficult. I wonder if I could do that thing. I bet I could. I'm going to go do it. Let's do the thing. So they sign up for a really difficult race, be it a 100-miler or a 50K or like something with a ton of elevation. Then they get out there and it's really hard. And then they get frustrated and then they quit. And it happens a lot. And I think it's kind of a tough thing to dial in because you theoretically knew it was going to be hard going into it, but then you quit because it's hard. And this is why I feel like it's a catch-22, because it's those two things explicitly are at odds. But I really think it comes down to the fact that we just don't really expect it to be as hard as it is, or even worse, maybe as boring as it is. Like you get out there and you do 80 miles of a 100-mile race or 70 miles and you've been running for that long and you're just like, not only are my legs the embodiment of fire right now, but I'm also going to be out here for another like 6 or 8 or whatever hours you're running at that pace at that point, and you just don't want to do it anymore. So I'm not going to be the guy that's like, you should finish every race forever, death before DNF. Like that's not my jam. If you get 95 miles into a 100-mile race and you're just like, you know what, like I don't want to do this. I hate running and I don't want to run anymore. I'm never going to run again. And I like my life is better spent elsewhere. I'm going to quit and buy an ice cream sandwich and like learn to play guitar today. Great. Good for you. I think that's fantastic. But like I very rarely, if I've ever, have seen that. Like it usually just sucks in the moment, and tomorrow you will be a much happier person if you actually finish the thing. And we end up with this, like, the reason it sucks so much in that moment is not that you, like, going into it, you knew it wouldn't be hard or whatever. You didn't realize what that meant. And it's just when we end up with this, what was a concept is now a reality. And you realize, like, going into it, we hear all these things. If you listen to other podcasts or people, or you know people who've done it, they will tell you that it's going to be hard and that you're going to want to quit and that your legs are going to hurt and you're probably going to get nauseous. And you will also have every reason to quit. And you, at some point, you're just going to have to not do that. And we know that going in. And all of that is true, but you don't really know what that feels like until you get there. I think we can, and I'll use an example from mine. I've had many injuries, and I'm going to tell a story. I was going to tell a story about my separated shoulder, but I think actually an ear infection is probably better. So let's dive into that. So when I was younger, just coming home from Korea, I think I was 25 or 26, and I was very into scuba diving at the time. And on the way home, a travel partner and I decided to go to Australia and New Zealand. And when you're scuba diving the Barrier Reef, it's really good to do a liveaboard because you can get like 4 dives a day. You get 20 dives in like 5 days, and you get to see everything and get really out in the middle of nowhere. It's really cool. And I highly recommend, if you ever get into scuba diving, that liveaboards are kind of the way to go. So we did that. And we got out there and went diving. And on one of my dives, it's like the second to last one we were going to be able to do, I had a really tough time like clearing my ears and creating pressure and stabilizing. And I felt a pop. I'm pretty sure that I at least partially blew my eardrum, because while the rest of that dive went well, pretty much as soon as I hit the surface, my ear was not good. And had some people try to help me out. We went drops and all this stuff. I had to skip the next dive, which is the last one. It's the only dive I've ever skipped on any trip, and it was unfortunate because I really like night dives. You get to see kind of cool stuff, like sharks and all that stuff. So we had to skip that, and then my ear pretty promptly felt like someone was taking an ice pick and jamming it in there for the next 12 hours, and there was no way to fix it. I couldn't move. Like, I pretty much just got to sleep on the deck where I was when this set in. And by sleep, I mean writhe in agony for the next 10 to 12 hours. And as soon as we docked, got out, went to see a doctor, which healthcare in other countries is cooler because it's it was free, and he just helped me out with getting some antibiotics and set me up, and it was pretty quickly fixed, which is nice because you're not really supposed to fly with an aggressive ear infection because, again, pops your eardrums. So handled that fairly promptly, and we were good to go. Now, I had an ear infection when I was a kid. I remember a lot of things when I was a kid. I do not remember feeling like I would have rather cut my head off than continuing to deal with that ear infection. If you or anybody you know regularly suffered ear infections coming up, I am truly sorry. That is, they're terrible. And my ex Alex, who she and I are still close, like the one who's here in the local, she grew up getting horrendous ear infections to the degree that like her left ear doesn't work right. She's half deaf there. So like very empathetic to the first like 15 years of her life. And it's not super fun because like when I was going through dive school, they also tell you, hey, if you get an ear infection, it is very likely going to be the end of your trip. And I remember in dive school thinking, nah, it can't be that bad. I've done so many things that have hurt my body, from like tearing ligaments to bursitis to all sorts of stuff to broken toes to whatever. I was wrong. If that were not the last night of my trip, it would have been anyway. Like there was no way that I could have kept going. And when you are leading into something, it's very easy to think, yeah, I know it'll suck, but it can't be that bad. Well, I think that's where we end up sometimes with ultras. And hopefully your ultra experience is not as bad as an ear infection, although a couple of the people I saw writhing in pain, vomiting on the side of Javalina, probably not 100%, they would not be in agreement. But for the most part, it's not going to be as bad as like feeling like you're being stabbed in the head. But running is a tough sport. And if you want to push your limits on it, be it to like new distances that you haven't done before, or new elevations, or even trying to set a 5K PR, you're probably going to suffer. And while we know that going in, we know it's going to be hard, we just don't know how hard it's going to be. And if we are confronted with that like reality, we often just either break or choose to keep going. Now, if we have a couple things going in, we can make it better. And one of the things I was hearing from a guy named Nicholas Berger, along with what's his name, Sean Bearden from Science of Ultra, the old Science of Ultra podcast, they put out a study recently. There were more authors on it. I'm sorry, I can't remember their names. That it was called The Limits of Ultra Running. And they were talking about it on, I think, Coop's podcast. And one of the big things that they noted is that perception is one of the biggest limits. So, yes, we have physical limits in food and all these things, but if you perceive what you're doing as harder, then it will be harder. And if we can perceive it as easier, it will be easier. And this breaks apart in ultras because a lot of the time we end up with something starting to go wrong a little bit, and your brain incorrectly like predicts and extrapolates for the next however many miles that you're not just going to continue suffering a little bit or at this level, that it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. So if your legs feel like fire at mile 25, they're going to fall off by the end of the race. If you're a little nauseous, then you will like vomited your liver up by the point of 100K, right? If you have a blister, then your foot is going to be literally nothing but blister, like the bone will just dissolve, right? So this is like kind of what your brain does and freaks out. And none of that is going to happen for the most part. Like you're not going to vomit up your liver, your foot is not going to turn into a giant blister, and your legs aren't going to fall off. You just like kind of deal with the suffering. And it might get worse. It'll probably actually get better, because at some point the suffering plateaus, and if we can just level it out and problem solve a little bit, then it will improve. And this is one of the reasons that prep helps so much. Like if you run, let's be honest, we hear people talk all the time about going like half marathon to 50K to 50 mile to 100K to 100 mile. And if we look at a couple of those steps, like they don't make sense physiologically. Like a marathon to 50K aren't really different. they are somewhat different in that your nutrition strategy has to be a little more on point. A road marathon to a trail 50K is different, but we'll look at a trail marathon to a trail 50K, it's like 5 more miles. It's not that big of a deal. But it can make a huge difference if you go from a half marathon to a 50K, because your brain thinks it is. And that is a big deal, very honestly. And if we look at going from like a marathon to 100K, that is an extra 12 miles that you get to struggle. And if you're really struggling, then every step during those 12 miles, it's not like it's just a new distance, right? So if you're already struggling by mile 40 and we go for another 22 miles or whatever it is, 62, yeah. Every step of those 22 miles is going to be a bear. So we got to recognize that one of the main reasons that we take these stepwise functions is not because there's actually that much difference between a 50 mile and a 100K. It is that your brain processes it a little differently because you've already done it. If you had told me a few years ago that I would go into a race pretty cavalierly to pace someone for 20 miles, and I care about somebody else's race a lot more than my own for the records, the fact that I was pacing was not like a downgrade. If anything, that was I need to make sure that my act is together so that at the very least I am not harmful and hopefully actively helpful. So I needed to make sure that I was in shape. And until very recently, I could not run due to asthma, right? So I needed to train quickly and well, and that was important to me. So if we look at if you had told me a couple years ago that I'd have been like, we'll knock out 20 miles in 6 weeks, that's fine. That would be crazy. But the fact is, I ran 50 miles last year. 20 just doesn't feel that much anymore. And I'm not saying it's not. It absolutely is. It's far, but it's fine. It wasn't a thing that I thought was going to kill me. Whereas 5 years ago, yeah, I would have absolutely been like, nah, you're crazy. 20 miles is too far. I'm not going to do that. Right? So if you've done it before, or if you've done something close to it before, it just becomes easier. And this is one of the reasons I think that the 100K to 100 mile distance is such a massive jump, because we're not going from 50 to 62 miles, or even, 50? If we go from a 50K to a 50 miler, that's a 19 mile jump. The 100K to a 100 miler is a 38 mile increase. If all the miles are measured appropriately, which it's trail racing, so 100 miles could mean 120. It's wild. So it's one of those things where we end up with our brain playing tricks on us. Sometimes positively, usually not though. Usually if we're struggling, we perceive it as being harder, then we extrapolate some extra version of that for the next however long, many, many miles, and it just ends up in a bad place. So if we can train our perception to be better, your race will often go better. Now, a few ways we can do that. One, accept it's going to suck. That's actually a big one, and we talk about it a lot, but I can't stress that enough. If you accept that there is going to be some suffering, things will be better, because you expect that you're going to have to talk yourself through it, right? And I think we often say that, but don't actually do that. So we think yeah, it's going to suck, but we don't actually visualize or conceptualize the fact that, yeah, I'm going to have to give myself come to Jesus talk in the middle of the trail and be like, hey, you are going to finish this trail. You're going to finish this ultra, right? And I don't think we understand a lot of the time before we really go for it that you're going to have to not slow down and miss the cutoffs when you could easily do that, or whatever your thing is, right? You will have very good reasons to not finish, as we talked about with Tony Klein when he was on here, and probably will again now that when he comes back. And you are going to have to not let those very good reasons become reality. Next, one way to make it easier is actually train properly. This is one of the things that I see so much from people, and when they reach out 3 weeks before a race and are like, what can we do? I'm like, very little at this point, because you should have started 6 months ago. We need to do your speed work so that everything else is easier. You need to make sure that you're actually practicing stuff on your long runs. You need to prioritize strength training because that injury should have been fixed 6 months ago, not now. Do your strength training, especially as we're heading into the off season for many people. If you have a spring season, now we're actually getting into training, or like an early spring race. Now should be the start of your training block. But if you were looking at I don't have any big races until next fall, now is a great time to step back for a second and lift heavy stuff for a few months and maintain your running, but put that in maintenance mode. Run whatever 20 miles a week and lift heavy stuff in a way that actually helps you prevent injury for next year. That'd be a great choice. And then realizing that, you don't have to run that 100-miler this year either, right? So train properly, give yourself time to train properly. And then if you don't actually think you're going to be able to do that, push it a year. That 100-miler will probably still be there. Sorry, I was just listening to Gary Robbins talk to Dylan on the Free Trail podcast. If you don't know what happened up in Whistler, you should listen to that. It was a couple episodes ago. Very worthwhile. I'm not going to dive into it here. But anyway, race will probably be there next year, so give yourself an extra year and make sure that you actually can go into it in a way that will make you proud, all right? Now, the other stuff is don't skip the little stuff, and that's not actually little. Hydrate. Clearly important, yet we do not do it well, especially when we have big temperature swings. So when we get back to an ultra and you run one in April, you are going to probably hit the perfect week where it goes from 60 to 80, because it happens every year, especially if you sign up for one of the Mad Moose races. They always seem to lie on that, hey, let's immediately kick the temperature swing as soon as we have a race going, right? So you can't actually get heat acclimated unless you have access to a regular sauna. So you're going to go in there and screw up your hydration. So let's make sure that we actually have a plan. We know how to adjust that plan and that you can knock that out. That is going to make it possible for you to fuel, which is what we're actually really looking for. Yes, hydration matters. It clearly matters, or you're going to die. So let's not belittle that. But when your legs really hurt, that is because you probably either tried to go out too fast and just had no business running the way you were running, or you messed up your fueling and you're bonking. So if you're not hydrated, you can't eat that fuel and you're going to bonk. So we need to make sure that you can hydrate or you can fuel appropriately. So practice that stuff. When we look at your stomach, it digests stuff through enzymes. And if you don't have enough of those enzymes, then you can't process as much food. Your body doesn't like to do extra stuff that it doesn't need. So if your body is not used to producing a ton of enzymes to produce or process sugar, especially while you're on the move, it just won't do that. So start early, many weeks out, and start fueling your long runs. Fuel them anyway. You'll perform better. But definitely start fueling your long runs. And then fuel some of your short runs. And fuel your speed work. And fuel, you get the point, right? So if we were looking at this, start fueling, build those enzymes, train your stomach. When we say you can train your stomach, you actually can. It's not like a muscle. It's trainable, though. So do it. And then finally, get some help. Find your emotional support human to pace you and help you cross the line. Because I had an athlete finish recently, Julie. I just posted a thing about her, and congrats to her. We had a big weekend in the Mountain Goat community. All of those people have had a ton of support. I was on a big text chain with both Brianna's and Julie's coaching teams and pacing and crewing teams, and they have been. It was amazing to see them all funnel together and make sure that they were getting the right aid at the right places and all this stuff, right? So if you have pacers and support and crew and all these things that can help make this less difficult, both for emotional support and just for the practicalities of running 100 miles in a day and a half, that will help for a couple reasons. One, your brain will be wrecked. So you're going to need someone to do a little bit of that extra work. And then also, it'll make the logistics easier and you'll perceive everything as being easier. If we can increase the perception of simplicity on these events, it makes them easier. And you can do this in a bunch of ways, but just know it's going to be hard. You signed up for it because it was hard. And despite how much I love Carl Meltzer, 100 miles is far. It is that far. And it is going to be a difficult thing to do. And that's a lot of the point and a lot of why we do it. And again, if you're interested in how to run these big races while being a parent and all of that kind of stuff, especially women with some postpartum things, please check out the next one with Lexi Miller. We'll be posting that soon too. So have a good night, and I'll be back with another one shortly. See ya. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.